In today's video, let's talk about the pros and cons of going into consulting. As many of y'all may know, I came from a non-target school when I was doing my recruiting. So in one aspect, I actually felt like I was kind of lucky in that I wasn't swept away by kind of just the shininess that consulting is because there was a bunch of people around me. Instead, I was able to really just hone in on it and figure out whether it was right for me without kind of the competition from a lot of other people who were really close by to me. And so in this video, I want to provide for you all a long list of pros and cons, kind of matching them together so that you can see both sides of different aspects about consulting to ultimately better make your choice about figuring out whether it's right for you or not. And then if you do decide that it's right for you, and then you want to figure out ways that you can improve different aspects of your interview process, such as casing or how to network, check out our other videos on this channel. But for now, let's dive into the pros and cons about consulting. I'll start off kind of basic. The first one, we'll just talk about the lifestyle and compensation. The pro there is that consulting, as many people know, is a pretty lucrative career out of college. It's definitely not the most high-paying job. I think some that might be the most high-paying that come to mind are like software engineering or investment banking, or even private equity, which I think usually is something you do a couple years out of college, but still nonetheless like an early career job. Consulting might not be as competitive as those, but it's still pretty competitive. If you're in the US and get hired out of undergrad to a big three consulting firm or to an elite consulting firm, you might be expecting to get paid, high five figures, if not low six figures when you take into account bonuses and all that stuff, which is an amazing salary for someone who's like 23, 24, 25 coming out of college. And then it also just gets increasingly higher as you go up the ladder, which I think at that point it might start beating out careers like software engineering, which I know start really high, but then at least from what I've heard from friends and what I've seen on like Glassdoor and stuff, that it might not increase over time as much as consulting or investment banking or any of these other things. So that's one pro about the lifestyle and compensation for consulting. Now the flip side of that, or the con that I'd like to bring up, is that you're definitely working for your money. You work pretty long hours and have generally an unsustainable lifestyle in some people's regards. You can expect to work anywhere from 50 to 60 hours on average. Sometimes it goes up from there. Sometimes it goes down, just depending on how the case is going. But it's usually around like 50, 55, 60 hours as the average, which is quite high and more impactful than, the 40 hours a week that most jobs are. The next aspect we'll talk about is the travel. So of course, the pro there is that you're getting to fly to different cities for, assuming that you're in a world where flying and going places is back to normal, but you're flying to different cities, you're staying in nice hotels, you're eating nice meals, kind of all on the client's dime. Of course, you're being responsible about it and whatnot, and that's something we can talk about at some other point. But another pro to the traveling, and honestly maybe even bigger of a deal in some people's eyes, is the fact that you get a bunch of points and rewards, both from credit cards, from airlines, from hotels, and even from like Uber or like rental car services because of all the traveling and spending money that you're doing. And so that's sometimes even a better perk because then you get to go on vacations or flights or have hotels for free on your own personal vacations. The other pro about traveling is something that we call alternative travel or alt traveling, where basically in some consulting firms, if you're on a travel case, you'll be able to, instead of returning back to your home city at the end of the work week, you can fly to any city where you can find a flight ticket that's either equivalent or lesser in value. I think the con about that, or the caveat, is that you might have to pay that ticket price. Like you might have to pay tax on it because of the fact that it's like a perk from work or whatever. But yeah, that's an awesome way for you to be able to get some really affordable, like flying in to go see friends on the weekends or something if you so choose. But of course, with all of these pros for traveling comes the cons, which is that there's a multitude of them, especially if you have a family. If you're someone who has a family or you have a significant other or just friends that you want to see on a daily basis, because either the roommates or whatever it might be, you're not going to be able to do that when you travel, especially because you're probably going to be traveling Monday through Thursday. Some people even travel Sunday through Thursday, where they leave Sunday night, just so that they don't have to worry about the hassle of Monday morning travel. And that leads me to the other con about traveling, which is that it can be pretty inconvenient sometimes, especially if you're traveling from one city to another city that doesn't have a direct flight. That's just going to add multiple hours to each one-way leg, which you're doing 2 per week, obviously. So that's sometimes 3, 4, 5, 6 hours out of your week gone just in airports and in airplanes. And then also, if you're having to travel really early in Monday, let's say your team takes the 10 a.m. flight, which that might even be like generous in some cases. Some people might even take the 7 or 8 a.m. flight. That means you probably have to be up by like 4, 4:30, 5 o'clock, which is not the best way to start your week for sure if you're waking up that early on Monday. Let's talk about the next thing, which is people. So I think this category is a resounding pro when it comes to consulting, and especially where I'm working currently. The people that you'll be around are really smart, motivated, intelligent, but not only that, they're also people who were selected to be personable, work well in teams, and work well with clients as well. So they kind of have the high EQ and the high IQ, which leads to people that are just really fun to be around, both because they can challenge you intellectually, both on the job, but then like more personally, but then also can relate to you, can understand when you're having a bad day, can, just empathize with you in ways that maybe average people aren't able to empathize with you. But of course, it just depends on the people that you're around. But generally, in my situation and what I've heard from other people is that the people in consulting are amazing. And honestly, most people's reasons why they like consulting is number one, because of the people. As for cons here, there aren't too many big ones. I think, of course, there's a couple that come to mind for me and things that I've experienced or my friends have experienced. The first one being that because you're around so many smart, intelligent people, it can be pretty easy to feel imposter syndrome. That's just something that each individual person, me, you, will have to work through on our own. But that's definitely something that comes as a result of being around really intelligent and smart people. And then kind of related to that is the fact that you will have a lot of pressure to perform well at the level of the people around you, because that's how most consulting firms, I believe, rate people, which is like kind of on a curve or in comparison to other people and how they're doing. And so I don't think, at least from my experience in the year and a half in I've had, it's not super toxic, and it's definitely not a direct competitive thing. Like, if someone is performing poorly, it's not because other people are performing well and it's a zero-sum game. That's not the case at all. But more so just that the bar in general will be high because there's a lot of smart people going through these firms. And then the last thing is that after you've been in the company for a year or two, you'll develop some pretty good friends who are close to you. And the sad thing can be that a lot of them might leave because of things that we'll talk about actually later on in this video, given that consulting has really good exit opportunities. And because, like we mentioned earlier, the lifestyle isn't the greatest, a lot of people don't want to stick around for too long. And so you'll not necessarily lose friends, because if you're of course still friends with them, but you just might not be able to see them as much in the office. And given that there's a high turnover, there'll just be a lot of new faces and a lot of old faces who might not be around for several years, So that's one thing to keep in mind. Although I would say, from my perspective, that's a quite small thing, not something that's that big of a deal, but just something I wanted to let y'all know, because I don't think many people on YouTube talk about that. The next thing I'd like to talk about is the professional development at these consulting firms. Specifically even from where I am, but then also I think this applies just more generally to all the big three, as well as just probably all consulting companies, which is that they really focus on the professional development of their people. And so if this is a job you're doing, especially out of undergrad, but even out of an MBA program, it is a fantastic place for you to learn a lot of skills, a lot of ways of thinking, a lot of ways about problem solving very quickly, and in a way that you might not have been able to do as quickly in other maybe corporate jobs or other things like that. I've heard oftentimes that starting your career in consulting is quite literally rocket fuel for your professional development, and that a year or two at a major consulting firm can be seen as sometimes like 3, 4, 5, 6 years at other places. And I can give you one specific example, which is that at a consulting firm, you can start being a supervisor of someone, so having a direct report, in as quickly as 1 to 2 years from starting the job, which I think is quite unheard of in other industry jobs. I think you might be able to do that in industry jobs, but you might have to get really lucky. Whereas like in consulting firms, it's pretty standard that like in your second or third year, even as an associate or as an analyst, that you might start managing other associates and other analysts. So that's one part about the professional development at these elite consulting firms that's a big pro. And then of course on the other side of that is you're also getting amazing client exposure. It might not be every case that you get to talk to the CEO or whatever, but there will definitely be opportunities where you get to talk to director level or executive or vice president level at the client that you're working at. And so because of that, you'll get really strong client skills in a way that your counterparts at other companies who don't get as much exposure to high level executives, they might not develop the same skills. Now, for the con when it comes to this professional development side, which is mainly just that because they put so much investment into you to develop you professionally, they also then expect a lot from you. And that's where I think the consulting up or out policy can kind of come in, where there's this perception out there that you must meet the bar, and if not, you're out immediately. And although that's not exactly there definitely is a pressure to meet the bar, just like there is at any workplace. You have to have a kind of standard performance. It's just that within consulting, they expect a lot out of you. They expect you to grow quickly. And if you can't match that, then that's something that can cause a lot of pressure in people and a lot of stress. So that's just one thing that I would want you all to know as you're looking to examine whether consulting is right for you or not. So it really does become a double-edged sword, this professional development thing of you learn a lot, you grow quickly, but then also it's because you're expected to, you're given the tools to. And so you just need to be able to find a way to cope with it in a healthy, sustainable way that doesn't either have you burnt out, doesn't leave you with mental health issues or problems, or that kind of thing. So the last major category that I wanted to talk about is extracurriculars at these consulting firms. And so you might be thinking like, dude, you're out of college. What do you mean extracurriculars? It's not like you join clubs or anything like that, right? Actually, that's not the case. There are some clubs and there are extracurriculars you can join even after you start working at these consulting firms. One of them, which is a pretty awesome opportunity, and then of course I'm going into the pros, but one of them is a pro bono consulting. And so these consulting firms are part of different networks of consulting firms that do pro bono work, for startups in the developing world that are working on social causes, or for, even in the US or whatever country you might be in. For example, you might be able to go and help out develop the strategy for a charter school system in your local area that serves underprivileged or like low socioeconomic status kids, just as an example. Or one thing I did was I was a pro bono consultant for a social impact startup in Pakistan that had, a social good mission. And then there are other things you can join that are kind of related to different identity groups. You could call them maybe affinity groups. For example, there's, Asians at whatever company, or blacks at, or, that veterans at, and then insert company, and you'll be able to join them if you're part of them or if you support them. And that's a really awesome way for you to be able to kind of just talk about your culture, your heritage with people, or be more, truly yourself. I'm part of the Asian affinity group at my company, and it's been awesome. Before, kind of restaurants and traveling shut down, we pretty often either do things that related to our culture to do, like, some people would host like a Chinese dumpling making session where we'd go and learn how to make dumplings and then eat them afterward, and it was amazing. Or go get Indian food, to celebrate Diwali or something like that. So pretty fun stuff that can actually make a positive impact on one's experience at one of these consulting firms. Of course, the downside of this is that you're already working a really intense job, and so it can feel like an extra chore that, you're not getting extra pay for it or anything. This is more just out of your enjoyment. And so if your case is really busy, it can be a really unfortunate situation that you might just kind of have to let these things go by the side. So that can be the main con, which is that you just might not have time to put in all of the interest or passion you want into these side extracurriculars. But the fact that they're there and that you can do them, I think, is a really awesome opportunity, and something that I didn't know when I was going through the recruiting process. So hopefully that's new information for some of y'all. Now let's talk about the work itself. Starting, of course, with the pros. As you all probably know about consulting, you gain a variety of exposure to a bunch of different industries and a bunch of different things that we call capabilities, which are essentially the type of work that you do. So it could be, like a cost reduction case, or it could be a growth strategy case, or could be an IT implementation. These are just a variety of different things that are kind of coming to mind, but you can do those kinds of things, so capabilities, or you can work in a bunch of different industries, whether it's healthcare, aerospace, you name it. You'll be able to get a lot of industry exposure. And then the other pro about that is that if you don't like what you're doing right now, either because you don't like the team you're working with, or you don't like the client or their industry, or you don't like the capability, you have the knowledge and the comfort that within 3, 6, 9 months, whenever your case will end, that you'll be working on something new and kind of be able to hit the refresh button. That's not really something that you can do at corporate jobs, or jobs where you're working at a company and, kind of just on a team and doing that thing in perpetuity. And so that's one thing that's really nice about consulting as well. But then, of course, this comes with cons. The first one being that, and this is something I've definitely felt myself, but then also with some friends I know have felt this as well, which is that you're not working on things that you're intrinsically or inherently motivated by. Of course, people who work in consulting firms enjoy providing client results, but there's only so much you can, enjoy that before you're realizing that, okay, I'm really passionate about education or the environment, but I'm not doing anything to solve problems in those aspects or in those fields. And so that can definitely get to you in a way where you might not care too much about the cost reduction case or the IT implementation case that you're working on, and you'd rather go work on these things that you have more passion about. The other con about the work itself that I wanted to bring up was that sometimes a lot of the work given the fact that consulting is a client services industry, can be dictated by factors that you might not agree with. For example, the client might like something done a certain way, but that certain way might cause a lot of headache and a lot of hours for you. And that's something that, as a client services industry, we just have to deal with sometimes. If you have a good manager or a good partner on your team, they can definitely shield you from that and try to work with the client. But sometimes that can even happen from the manager or the partner because they like things done a certain way, and you're kind of at the mercy of them. But of course, when we're starting to get into your own internal consulting team, that's a problem that you'll face no matter where you are, which is that you might have supervisors or higher ups who want things done a certain way that might be more time consuming or in a way that you might not agree with, and that's just kind of how it is. And then lastly, I wanted to talk about 4 kind of categories of pros that I thought of that I couldn't really find a con to. And so I hope this will help, and maybe in the comments below if you all can think of cons, let me know. But these are all just kind of things that I thought would be important to mention for your calculation, but aren't necessarily things that have a downside to them, which is fantastic, right? I mean, it's good that there aren't a whole bunch of downsides. So the first one is that there's a lot of social and fun things to do with these consulting firms. They do a great job, especially when the world was normal and, we could all meet in person and stuff like that. They did a really good job of having a lot of fun events. So an example might be Friday lunches where the office comes together for a catered meal, especially I think during the summers when the interns are there. And then I know where I work, we have global trainings where when you join, but then also every about like 1 or 2 years, you'll have a new training for the new tenure or the new position you're at. And it'll be somewhere across the globe. So I know I was supposed to go to Ireland before traveling got shut down, so I could go do my global training. And then I know other trainings are all across the world, Middle East and Asia, etc., where consultants who are starting, who have started around the same time you did, go to that one place to get trained. And I'm sure that's not unique to just where I work, but rather to probably all big 3 companies, but then if not, more broadly as well. And then they also have random things where I know once a year, a bunch of people will get together in a city for a World Cup event where, each office kind of has a soccer team that represents them, and, anyone can go and you just go and play soccer, have fun, hang out, and that kind of thing. So it's those kinds of cultural aspects about consulting firms that make them really fun to work at. And so hopefully for those of y'all who are watching, you're either watching, at a time when the world's kind of back to normal and traveling is a thing, or you'll graduate in a year or a couple of years from now where all of that stuff will be back and in full swing. The next pro that I wanted to talk about was exit opportunities. There's a bunch of exit opportunities at these consulting firms, and I can testify that from my own perspective where, weekly, monthly basis, I'm getting reached out by private equity headhunters or, random corporate job headhunters, and that kind of is true of if you work at any consulting firm. And so it's nice that, one, you have people actively reaching out to you. So there's kind of always an option. If you're not liking your current job, you can kind of go check those opportunities out. But then also, 2, that it is kind of a well-trodden path that people from consulting will go into private equity or will go into corporate roles. And so you have kind of these very lucrative and sometimes even really good lifestyle career paths just at your fingertips after you start working for one of these elite consulting companies. The next pro that I wanted to talk about, which is pretty related to the thing we just mentioned about exit opportunities, is the fact that you will have a stamp on your resume. I can't tell exactly if consulting is the reason for what I'm about to say, but I've done a lot of reaching out, just randomly to people that I want to talk to while I've been a consultant. And I think they see where I work on my LinkedIn once I reach out to them. And I think that definitely has an impact on them responding to me and being like, yo, like, yeah, sure, I'd love to talk to you about X, Y, or Z, because they know that I'm someone who's smart and hardworking because of where I work. Of course, I can't know for sure, but I think that's definitely an aspect of it. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about as a pro is that these consulting firms have really cool opportunities from a career perspective. For example, a lot of these consulting firms will pay for some, if not all, of your business school if you get to go. And this isn't just like an online business school or overnight business school, but rather like you literally stop working for 2 years, go enroll in usually an elite business school, so Harvard, a Stanford, Kellogg, Chicago, MIT, whatever it might be. And then you're a full-time MBA student and they're paying for your tuition, sometimes giving you bonuses and stuff just for like retention and whatnot. And then you come back, and I think usually the policy is for every year of business school they paid for, you have to work for that many years. And so most business school opportunities are 2 years. And so you just have to come back, work for 2 more years, get your business school paid for, and Yeah, you're good to go from that perspective. So that's one really awesome thing. And then some other companies, I know what they'll do. They either call them externships or secondments, but basically it's a 6 month period where you literally get to go work for a different company. So you might be a consultant at BCG, and then I think your senior analyst year, I forgot what their positions are exactly called, but it's basically after like 2 or 3 years of you being an analyst out of undergrad, you'll get to do a secondment where you go and do an externship, or basically an internship, they call it, at a different company. So some people will go and like work at Nike or Google or a venture capital fund or a startup or whatever it might be. And that's just a way for you to go and try out an industry or try out a passion before coming back to consulting. And then if you really like the internship, you just go work there full time. And I know in parallel with that, some companies will also offer a 6 month office transfer. So if you don't want to do the internship, but you want to continue working as a consultant, go do a 6 month office transfer. And that's, I think, almost exclusively outside of the country you work at. So if you're in New York, it's not like you can just go to SF, but you might need to go to like London or Amsterdam or Australia, Asia, Africa, South America, wherever else it might be, but just a different country.